Good Sunday evening, everyone. I'm Meteorologist Addison Green here at KHOU, based in Houston, Texas. In case you are viewing us from outside Texas or outside the United States, we're diving in towards our Atlantic tropical update, where we have two new storms to talk about. And if you joined us last night, we were keeping our eyes on two systems of interest that now have become Peter and Rose. And we're also keeping our eyes on two more waves out there as we're starting to make our way in throughout the heart of the hurricane season. So here's the latest information we got for you. Tropical Storm Peter will bring around some rough wave activity and breezy winds to portions of the Caribbean islands as well as the Bahamas. Mainly from Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, over towards Hispaniola that's shared by Haiti and Dominican Republic, all the way up in towards the Bahamas. There'll be some rough surf activity, maybe some rip current concerns, as well as some breezy winds from Peter, even though it will still be a good distance away. Tropical Storm Rose formed earlier on this Sunday, and it will be nearing portions of the Cabo Verde Islands as it's starting to get itself together, but then will eventually start to move further away from the area, but still, thankfully, stay out at sea. And now that with these two storm systems being on the board, we are looking at a new stat right here. Since 1966, the beginning of the satellite era, we have now seen 3 seasons since then, 2021 now, 2005, and 2020, with 17 plus named storms by this date. Pretty much indicating that we are on pace for seeing another very active season out there this year, as well as the potential, like we saw in those 2 seasons, to be another record-breaking year. 2005 was the first time that we went through the entire alphabet list for the season, and we had to move on towards the Greek alphabet, where we went and checked off several names. Then, moving on in towards just last year, we went past that point, checking off several more names on that Greek alphabet list, to the point where now we are no longer going to be using the Greek alphabet list. Instead, we get a supplemental alphabet list as we make our way in throughout the tropical season, if merited. Now, moving throughout the next several weeks, of course, we'll start to see our tropical activity going down little by little as we head in towards October. You're starting to find some conditions not conducive for tropical development, seeing your wind shear factor being more of a higher caliber. You're now starting to get those sea surface temperatures starting to go down just a touch every week or so. And also we're dealing with the potential of some Saharan dust, and the tropical wave activity starts to diminish itself entirely. So we do see those factors starting to go down as we make our way in towards December, and then as you go well in towards the winter months, we don't consider tropical systems a factor at all. When just watching the cold fronts that come by across the United States, for instance, and maybe seeing some big winter storms or blizzards come on in. But now that we've checked off Peter and Rose off the list right there, we're keeping our eyes on the next 4 names before we say goodbye to this list potentially. That's Sam, Teresa, Victor, and Wanda. And we still have, like I said, several more weeks to go just to get out of the heart of the season and to start to be on the downward trend. So the big board right here showing you what's going on across the entire Atlantic tropical basin. That includes the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean islands, as well, of course, the Atlantic Ocean from the equator northward. So we have Peter right there. We're going to keep our eyes on that one first, and then we're going to dive in towards Rose. You can see right there starting to get its act together little by little. And then we have 2 tropical waves that we're keeping our eyes on as well. Disturbance number 1, it's just starting to come in off the African continent right there, and this highlighted area is where there will be the potential for growth and development. But that's where we see that factor come on in of 50% coming our way in terms of chance of development the next 2 to 5 days. This disturbance, number 2, has a next to no chance of developing next 2 days, but that chance does increase slightly to 30% 2 to 5 days from now. And you can see that here, X marks the spot just southeast of Newfoundland, pushing in towards the Canadian Maritimes. That's what's left of Tropical Storm Odette. Started to go through the transitional period of no longer being a tropical system, starting to switch over towards being extratropical, which means it no longer has a warm core. Its core is now transitioning to a cold central core, which is what you typically get for your run-of-the-mill thunderstorms and storm systems making their way across the northern and southern latitudes. Well, as we start to see this system drift a little further south and then southeast over time, it's going to maybe run into some slightly warmer sea surface temperatures, as well as they're dealing with the potential for a little less wind shear. But it's a very small chance this system actually gets its act together and reorganizes in towards it would be a subtropical storm. But we'll worry about that one at another time because it's out in the open waters of the North Atlantic. and it's not going to be too much of a factor for too many areas over that way, although it may be an issue as we go in towards Greenland and Iceland over the next several days when it eventually gets picked up by the jet stream up aloft. So here we are, first things first. Tropical Storm Peter. It has winds of 45 miles per hour as of the earlier advisory around 4 o'clock, and it's moving to the west-northwest at a pretty good speed, about 17 miles per hour or so. Pressure sitting at 1,007 millibars right there, and as we look at the storm structure, it does look very lopsided. So it's traveling in this direction. Let me go ahead and try and draw that straight. It's moving in this direction, and you can see most of the convection is on one side of that center of circulation right there. So it's definitely being impacted by some wind shear up aloft, but it was able to be found to have a closed center of circulation earlier on today and in towards last night, hence getting the name Tropical Storm Peter, strengthened towards being a tropical storm. But that general area of circulation, it's rather broad. Right there, we can see it going on with those winds starting to swirl around in a counterclockwise direction just east of the Leeward Islands. So it's going to try and get itself together, try and get its central circulation to become more concise, more put together, and try and get this convection to go up and over and around completely in developing the center of circulation, in which case you're going to start to see some real strengthening, growth, and development. But for the time being, this system is going through a little bit of a struggle right there as it's being impacted by the wind shear up aloft. Over the course of the next several days, we'll watch Peter move just north and east of Puerto Rico, and there's the Bahama Islands all the way out this way. And you can see it'll start to get curved up towards a northerly direction, weakening over time from a tropical storm down towards a depression, and then possibly in towards a remnant low by next weekend. But you're probably wondering, well, if it's going to go this direction, what's making it curve up this way? Well, we're talking about some upper level steering winds right there, and we'll get into those details in just a moment because those upper level steering currents and pressure systems play a big factor in where these tropical systems go. If you were joining me yesterday, I was talking about that ocean heat content and how we have a scar, visible scar right there, where we had Hurricane Larry, major Hurricane Larry, move across this way very slowly. Well, it helped to drain the heat off the sea surface and start to do a little upwelling, getting that colder water at the lower portions of the ocean to come up because it has to replace the warm water that was recently taken. And as a result, you see a scar right there, almost looks like a trench. But what we are dealing with Peter is that it's going to be moving over some nice, favorably warm waters, especially getting closer and closer towards the Bahamas. But then as it starts to make its way towards a north-northeasterly direction, that turn, it'll start to run into some colder waters as it will continue to weaken and continue to be impacted by some wind shear. So there are a lot of factors out there not in Peter's favor. Let's go ahead and compare the computer models right here. Two of our long-range models that we use to track tropical systems and weather in general across the planet. The American model is in yellow, the European model is in red. And you can see as we look at this point right now, this evening, both are in agreement, of course, where it is currently located. But as we move forward in time, they start to disagree in where we start to see the system moving and if it's going to strengthen and develop. So by Tuesday morning, we now have the European model showing a closed area of circulation. But the American model in yellow, not quite so much. There's an open wave right there, so it looks like it starts to do a little bit of some breaking down, and that closed center circulation starts to get stretched thinner and thinner. Heading forward in past Tuesday into eventually Wednesday and through to Thursday morning, then eventually the afternoon hours, we now have the European model showing a closed area of circulation, pulling a little bit further away from the Bahamas, while the American model starts to bring it closer towards the Bahamas, but now we have just a big broad area of closed circulation. So it's struggling to keep itself together, probably a weak tropical storm or maybe just a strong tropical depression. But as we move forward in towards next weekend, going through Friday, Saturday, and eventually Sunday, we now see the European model in red does have what looks to be a very strong or at least organized tropical system. Meanwhile, the American model, the GFS model, does eventually start to show a closed area circulation, but still very broad, and it's going over colder waters. Right here, I'm going to go ahead and highlight this area. That is Bermuda. So either way, whether we have a very organized system or a loosely strung together organized tropical system, it's going to be impacting potentially the island nation of Bermuda. Rough wave activity, definitely some breezy to gusty winds and bands of rain showers coming over that way. But it looks to be moving away from the bulk of the Caribbean islands, from the Bahamas down in towards Puerto Rico. Now let's move on over towards Tropical Storm Rose. Has winds sustained of 40 miles per hour, so it's a minimal tropical storm. and it's moving to the north-northwest at 16 miles per hour. Pressure, it's 1,005 millibars. Over here, these are the Cabo Verde Islands, and we typically find tropical waves coming off the African continent right past this area, and we call these systems Cabo Verde type systems because they come over this area, but those are usually the ones that we definitely have to keep our eyes on more closely because those are typically ones that become stronger and become much more organized, become major hurricanes and potentially impact portions of the Caribbean islands or the United States or Central America because they can simply travel such a long distance over the central portions of the Atlantic, strengthening and organizing slowly over time until eventually they become big monsters. Thankfully, this season we've been seeing a lot of elements not in their favor, so we aren't seeing major hurricanes popping up left and right in this very active season. But back to Rose, we can see right here that area of center of circulation looks more together than Peter, but we are definitely seeing much of that convective activity, that thunderstorm development, much like Peter, on one side, as it's mainly in towards the areas, go ahead and draw it, right in front of the storm system instead of being on the side, as well as in towards the back. I can definitely see some upper level winds that have impacted portions of Rose right here. We can start to see some of that upper level winds starting to push some of those cloud tops down towards the south and westerly direction, but at least it's trying to get itself a little more organized. I can see those highlighted cloud tops are purple, starting to become more numerous and more cohesively together. So it may start to do a little bit of some organizing. We'll see after a couple of updates from the National Hurricane Center if it does actually strengthen and develop. But either way, we're going to be seeing this system going over across the open waters of the Atlantic. So that's some good news right there. So here's the Cabo Verde Islands over that way, just to the west of the west coast of Africa, to put your bearings straight. These are Canary Islands, and the Azores are, oh, they're just underneath this banner right here. But either way, it's pulling away from all those land masses into the open waters of the Atlantic, eventually weakening back down in towards a tropical depression and then a tropical storm. Let's go ahead and cancel that. Whoops, didn't mean to touch that. All right, so now we're going to talk about Rose and what is making its journey over in that direction, where we see a lot of the tropical tracks, the spaghetti plots, all are saying the same thing. It's going to move towards a northwesterly direction over time. And even though there is some disagreement right here towards the end of its life cycle, either way, for the most part, it's not going to be bothering anybody. That's why we call storms like this a fish storm. So now we get in towards the upper level winds and why we are seeing these winds being a factor and the steering currents of tropical systems. So I'm going to go ahead and move this graphic a little back and forth so you can go along with me to see how this system is moving. And just let me fix this banner real quick. Sometimes the graphics save the way you want it and sometimes they don't. But that's the magic of technology. I can go ahead and make a change and it will stay, and you're watching this live or at least on the video feed. All right, so as we move forward in time, we can see at this system, we have Peter and Rose right here for you. Here's Peter and here's Rose. What I got on the big map for you is the wind shear at 250 millibar levels. This is 34,000 feet, the same altitude that commercial jetliners fly, and that's the top of this portion of the atmosphere, the troposphere. As we're looking right here across the big map, we have an area of low pressure swirling in a counterclockwise direction up ahead of Peter, with an area of high pressure swirling in a clockwise direction. Over out there towards where Rose is located, that's an area of high pressure spinning also in a clockwise direction. What you see right here, these lines that are moving around continuously, those are stream lines, and that's where we're seeing the direction that they're flowing in by where they are moving towards, and also seeing their strength and intensity by how they change color. Green is considered low strength and intensity for those winds. Orange to red is considered strong winds, and when you're dealing with strong winds up aloft, that will definitely lead to more wind shear as these systems run into those winds or perhaps get carried along with them, depending upon what situation we are dealing with. But let's move forward, and you can go in towards the time frame of Monday morning. Now we can see we have Peter making its way towards the northwesterly direction, but it's running into that upper area of low pressure that wants to take it to the north. High pressure just behind it wants to keep pushing it to the west. So it's a battle between those two pressure systems right there. In terms of Rose, we have this high pressure system trying to steer it towards a northwesterly direction, but look where it's running into. It's running into a lot of wind shear running right into it. It's kind of like running into a little headwind, so to speak, and that's going to help to slow it down and also help to weaken it or at least cap it from getting stronger over time. What the wind shear does for these tropical systems, it's like putting a banana in a tailpipe of your vehicle. You can't quite get that clean exhaust flow to go from your engine through the tailpipe and out and get your vehicle to run properly if it's clogged up. Well, that's what this wind shear does right there. Kind of like clogs up their big cloud, I should say, profile, and helps to cut off some of those cloud tops and push them to the side, maybe displacing the bulk of their convection. Well, when you're running into some strong winds up aloft right there, that's definitely going to help to knock off some of those cloud tops and maybe displace some of that convection going forward. Speaking of going forward, let's do that, shall we? Moving forward in towards Tuesday morning, very early Tuesday morning. And now we have that low pressure system that was in front of Peter starting to move further to the north, putting a little less wind shear stress in front of it. So it's going to still try and make its way westward because this high pressure system is the bigger system and it's winning that battle and pushing it westward. With Rose right here, we have this high pressure system starting to weaken. I don't see quite a very tight circulation. It's very much broad, but it's still there. But with Rose, it's still getting centered towards the northwesterly direction, still running into some strong wind shear up aloft, with a little trough right here trying to pick it up and bring it towards the northeasterly direction. The high pressure system is running a little weaker than the trough, so that's where we're going to see potentially Rose getting drifted a little bit more towards the north, towards our northeasterly direction, getting picked up by those upper level winds aloft. As we move forward in towards, let's go towards Tuesday night, 10 o'clock. This time frame is Central Time, I may add. Now we can start to see, let me see here, there we go. Now we can start to see that we had that low pressure system up at front of Peter's broken down completely, and we just have now a very broad trough. Still, we're going to have Peter running into some wind shear up ahead of it, but you can see that there's definitely a lot less wind shear it's going to be running into as it makes its way towards the areas just north and east of the Bahamas. With Rose over this way, high pressure has started to move towards the east. It's started to back up a little bit. And we've now just kind of had that steering current kind of weaken behind it. Instead, we're starting to see that this wind shear up ahead of it has weakened as well. That trough was not able to pick it up. So instead, we're going to still have Rose drifting over towards this vicinity right there. It wants to go towards the more favorable portion of the map right here, where it's not going to run into the wind shears and where it can cleanly move across in the atmosphere, being guided by those upper level pressure systems. Let's move forward a little bit more so as we go in towards Wednesday night. And now I see a new area of low pressure in towards Thursday morning, forming where I mentioned that big broad trough. So that's going to help to now push Peter towards the north, where it's running into some strong wind shear right here up ahead of it, just southwest of Bermuda, which is right there. Okay, so that system is getting pushed away from the United States, away from the Bahamas, and making its way towards the northerly direction. With Rose over here, high pressure is completely moved out of the picture, and we have this system now running straight into some upper level winds in the opposite direction. So what this is going to do, it's going to help to weaken Rose. It's running into some cooler waters around that latitude as well. So we got two factors right there, not helping Rose to strengthen and develop, and that's what we see all throughout its journey. It stays as a tropical storm with winds probably going to about 40 to 50, maybe 60 miles per hour during that course of time frame. And then that's about it. If it does make it to a hurricane, it may be just a Category 1 hurricane and be brief before it starts to run into those upper level winds shearing it apart. Now we head in towards Friday morning at midnight, and now we have Rose right there. You can see that circle getting bigger, indicating that the National Hurricane Center means that there's a lot of uncertainty towards the end of its life cycle where it'll go. But what we also see is now weakened down towards a depression, no longer a tropical storm, as it continues to run straight into those headwinds up aloft at 250 millibars. So Rose is not long for this world as we go throughout the next several days. It'll eventually get broken and torn apart. With Peter over here, still getting carried over towards the north, now northeasterly direction. It's going to try to go in towards Bermuda right here, but we do have some upper level winds right up ahead of it that will want to try and take it out towards a northeasterly direction. So at best, we may just see it kind of clip a little glancing blow to Bermuda, and that's about it. If it does happen to go right over the island nation, at that point in its life cycle, Peter would be definitely weaker, and it'll still be bringing around some breezy, gusty winds, some rain bands, and some rough wave activity, but we're not going to be seeing an organized monster hurricane bearing down on that island nation. So that's also some good news right there that we have to share with everybody watching, because I'm sure a lot of interest across the Caribbean, United States, even Europe and Africa are keeping their eyes on the tropics during this time of the year. And as we make our way in towards the end of this video right here, we have one more factor to take a look at, and that is the tracking of the Saharan dust. You can see a plume of it will be coming in off the African continent, right in behind Peter, which will be about here, and Rose will be around here. So there will be some interaction with some of that dust, which, much like myself and yourself out there, if you're breathing in dust and pollen and other things in the atmosphere, you'll start to cough, you'll start to wheeze, you won't be breathing right. Same thing with tropical systems. They don't like this stuff at all. So they don't want it, but unfortunately every now and then you get some big time plumes of dust getting shoved off the Saharan desert, driven westward up aloft in the atmosphere, carry thousands of miles across the Atlantic that can sometimes completely wipe out tropical activity, or at least stop any activity that's currently out there from strengthening and developing further. So that's some good news that we have to share as we're going through this peak of the season, or at least towards the most active month of the season. So final thoughts. Peter and Rose will be around for a few days, but won't impact any land masses directly. At best, they kick up some wave activity, especially Peter, closer towards the Caribbean islands and the Bahamas. And while there are some hazards in the tropics, we will deal with those conditions not being ripe for more tropical development to pop up and really spontaneously develop. You may find a few waves coming off the African continent that may start to get themselves organized and develop, but are we starting to see monster hurricanes left and right? Does not look to be the case because of those hazards that are around for the next several weeks. And in terms of the United States, we are typically protected from tropical systems, quote unquote protected, by cold fronts that help to swing on down across from the plains in towards the southeast, aided by troughs up aloft in the atmosphere. So any tropical systems that are getting steered towards our direction, they kind of get pushed right back out to sea, and thankfully don't impact too many states of the United States, or maybe it's just a glancing blow. But nonetheless, that typically does become a factor that we keep our eyes on as we make our way in throughout the autumn season. It's not a guarantee, but nonetheless, we do look forward to those fronts coming down, and then eventually seeing those systems come towards our direction and then get kicked right back out to sea. So if you have any thoughts, concerns, questions, feel free to reach out to me on social media. Here are my social media handles on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Be happy to answer any questions you may have as we continue to go through this tropical season.